I traveled across the country to meet my internet boyfriend. He ghosted me at the airport. The sliding doors opened and closed every few seconds, breathing cold air into the terminal like a machine that didn't need rest. I stood just past the threshold where the carpet changed texture, my suitcase upright beside my leg. The handle was still warm from my hand. I noticed that detail because it was the only thing that felt familiar. The arrivals board chimed overhead, short electronic notes that repeated every few minutes. They were too clean, too orderly, for what was happening. People moved around me and practiced arcs, following patterns they didn't have to think about. A woman ran forward and wrapped her arms around a man in a navy jacket, her shoes squeaking slightly on the polished floor. A child dropped a stuffed animal and cried until someone scooped it up without breaking stride. A rideshare driver rotated a cardboard sign slowly, like he'd forgotten who he was waiting for. I checked my phone again. No new notifications. The screen reflected faintly on the floor beneath my shoes, a pale rectangle of light that disappeared when I tilted it away. He had said he would be waiting by baggage claim. Not just baggage claim, he'd been specific. Near the coffee kiosk. By the pillar with the scratch on it. He joked about it, said it was the easiest landmark in the whole airport. You literally can't miss it, he'd said. I walked there first, weaving through people who were already reuniting, already done waiting. I stopped by the kiosk. Then I walked back the way I came. Then I stood still and scanned faces instead of places, trying to match what I'd built in my head to the strangers moving past me. A man leaned against the wall scrolling through his phone. Two teenagers argued quietly near a vending machine, their voices sharp and bored. A woman stood alone holding flowers wrapped in brown paper, shifting them from one arm to the other. I watched her closely, wondering how long she'd been waiting, whether she was also telling herself a story about delays. No one looked back at me. The air smelled like disinfectant and burnt coffee. Somewhere behind me, a suitcase wheel rattled unevenly, repeating the same sound until it faded. I adjusted the strap of my bag on my shoulder, a small movement that didn't change anything except confirm I was still standing there. My phone vibrated. My thumb moved before I thought about it. Welcome to California. I stared at the screen longer than made sense. The message felt out of sync with the moment, like it belonged to a different timeline. Then I looked up again, toward the automatic doors, expecting him to appear late and apologetic, phone in hand, already explaining. Instead, the doors slid shut again, sealing the space where I had been looking. The glass reflected my face back at me, flattened by fluorescent light, smaller than I expected, someone waiting for something that wasn't arriving. I told myself to be patient. I told myself not to catastrophize. Airports were chaos. Anything could happen. I replayed our last conversation in my head, searching for signs I might have missed. There hadn't been tension. There hadn't been hesitation. The night before, he'd sounded calm. Excited, even. He'd laughed when I knocked my elbow against the dresser while packing and told me to stop rushing. I'm not going anywhere, he'd said. I stood there longer than made sense. Long enough that the rhythm of the terminal shifted around me. Long enough that the people arriving after me were already gone. We met on a gaming site. It always sounds strange when I say that out loud, even now, even though it shouldn't. It wasn't a dating app. It wasn't even flirtatious at first. We were in the same lobby after a match we both lost, and he messaged something short about how chaotic the final round had been. No emojis. No compliments. Just a comment that could have gone unanswered. I replied because I agreed. That was it. At first, we talked about the game, strategies, updates, which characters were broken after the last patch. We played together a few times, casually, without scheduling. Then the conversation drifted the way conversations always do when two people keep showing up. We talked about work schedules, time zones, the cities we lived in. He was across the country. That felt abstract, like a detail you file away without weight. Within a week, we were messaging every day. Not constantly at first, just consistently. A message when I woke up, a reply sometime during his lunch break, another late at night. Over time, the gaps filled in. The conversations lengthened. We learned each other's rhythms without naming them. I knew when he'd go quiet because he had meetings. He knew when I'd be unavailable because of my shifts. We started anticipating each other without realizing we were doing it. We never FaceTimed. That detail didn't feel important then. It actually felt refreshing. There was no pressure to perform, no anxiety about angles or lighting. He said he didn't like being on camera. He said he was private. I didn't push. It felt respectful, even mature, like we were letting something build naturally instead of forcing it. There were pictures, though, not posed ones, ordinary ones. His coffee on a dashboard, A blurry photo of his shoes on a sidewalk. A picture of his dinner plate, half eaten. I sent the same kinds of things. My lunch. My view from the parking lot at work. A mirror selfie where my face was mostly out of frame. It felt balanced. Equal. Nothing curated. We had a lot in common in ways that felt specific. Not just surface things you list on profiles. We talked about childhood routines, not dramatic stories, small things. How we both ate cereal out of mugs growing up. How we hated grocery stores at certain times of day because the lights felt too bright. We liked the same obscure bands, the kind you only stumble onto late at night. We complained about work the same way, without drama, just listing frustrations like inventory or schedules, as if we were decompressing together. Days stacked on days. Weeks passed. Months. Then years. 3 years. That number still feels unreal when I say it. 3 years of daily contact. 3 years of good mornings and good nights. 3 years of knowing someone's habits without ever sharing physical space. We tried to meet before. It never happened. Something always fell apart close to the finish line. A family obligation on his end. A sudden work project on mine. The explanations were detailed, plausible. They didn't feel evasive. They felt unlucky. We joked about being cursed by logistics. We adjusted expectations. We stayed connected. When he suggested I come to him, it didn't feel impulsive. It felt overdue. We planned carefully. He told me which airport to fly into, which airline he preferred because it was easier to navigate. He said he'd taken the day off work. He talked about restaurants he wanted to take me to, places he grew up going. He asked what kind of coffee I liked, what side of the bed I preferred, whether I slept with the TV on. Those questions felt intimate in a way that reassured me. They felt like preparation. The night before my flight, he stayed on the phone while I packed. I folded clothes and set them into my suitcase while he talked about traffic patterns near the airport. He reminded me not to forget my charger. He told me to bring a sweater because it got cold at night. At one point, he went quiet, and when I asked what he was thinking, he said, "Tomorrow's finally real." I believed him. At the airport, before boarding, I sent him a photo of my coffee cup with the gate number behind it. He replied with a joke about how he'd probably be standing there too early, checking his watch like an idiot. When I landed, I texted, "Just touched down." The message delivered. It was never read. Back in the terminal, I checked the time. 10 minutes late. Fine. I checked again. 20 minutes. Still fine. I told myself he might be circling for parking. I told myself his phone might be dead. I told myself not to spiral. I walked the length of baggage claim and back, pulling my suitcase behind me, the wheels clicking softly over seams in the floor. I stopped at the coffee kiosk even though I didn't want anything, just to have a reason to stand still. I watched people greet each other and leave. I watched my own reflection in the glass, waiting to recognize myself again. I called him. It rang until it went to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. That felt too heavy for the moment. I tried again. Same result. An hour passed, then another. The terminal thinned, families dispersed. Cleaning crews moved through with carts that hissed as they sprayed the floors. A man mopped in slow, deliberate strokes, not looking up. I sat on one of the molded plastic chairs near the wall, my suitcase lined up neatly in front of me like order might help. I checked my phone obsessively, refreshing without thinking. I reread old messages, looking for reassurance, for proof that this wasn't happening. I scrolled back months, then years, watching the history of us flicker past. Eventually, I ordered a rideshare. I didn't text him that I was leaving. I didn't know what to say that wouldn't feel like an accusation. As the car pulled away from the terminal, I watched the airport recede through the window, its lights blurring slightly. My phone sat heavy in my lap. Still nothing. By the time we reached the hotel, the sky was dark. I checked in mechanically. The clerk asked how my day was, and I said, "Good," because that was easier than anything else. The elevator hummed. The hallway carpet muted my footsteps. In the room, I set my suitcase by the wall and sat on the edge of the bed without turning on the lights. I texted him once more that night. "I'm here." Delivered, not read. I slept with the lights on. The light in the hotel room never fully dimmed. Even with the curtains drawn, a dull orange glow leaked in from the parking lot outside, tracing the outlines of furniture and casting long shadows across the carpet. I lay on top of the comforter, shoes kicked off but still dressed, phone resting on my chest like it might vibrate if I stayed close enough to it. It didn't. I woke up before my alarm, disoriented by the unfamiliar ceiling and the steady hum of the air conditioner. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then everything came back at once, the airport, the waiting, the silence. My phone was face down on the nightstand. I flipped it over slowly, as if speed might somehow influence what I'd see. Nothing. No missed calls. No messages. No notifications at all. I showered longer than necessary, letting the water run hot until the bathroom filled with steam. I stood there longer than I needed to, staring at the tile, trying to feel normal again. When I got out, I laid my clothes on the bed with care, smoothing wrinkles that didn't matter. I moved deliberately, like routine could anchor me. I left the hotel and walked to a cafe he'd mentioned once, casually, months earlier. He'd said they made the best breakfast sandwich in the city. I ordered the exact thing he'd described, even though I wasn't hungry. I sat by the window and watched people pass outside, keys swinging from their hands, backpacks slung over shoulders, coffee cups balanced precariously on lids. Everyone seemed to know where they were going. I sent another message. Can you just let me know you're okay? Delivered, not read. At first, I clung to practical explanations. Maybe something had happened to him. Maybe his phone was lost. Maybe there was an emergency. I cycled through possibilities that allowed him to still be the person I thought I knew. I checked local news, scanning headlines for accidents, power outages, anything that could explain the silence. Nothing fit. By midday, the quiet felt heavier. Not delayed, not accidental, intentional, even if I couldn't yet accept that word. I called him again, straight to voicemail. I tried from a different app, then from the hotel phone, blocking my number. The line rang, unanswered, until it disconnected. I went back to the hotel room and sat on the bed, phone in my hands, scrolling without purpose. I read old messages in reverse, watching the tone change as we got closer to the trip, more excitement, more specificity. There were messages about the exact day, the exact time, the exact place. There was nothing vague about it. On the second day, I woke with a headache that settled behind my eyes and refused to leave. I barely slept, drifting in and out, dreaming that I was back in the terminal, watching the doors open and close without anyone stepping through. I checked my phone immediately. Still nothing. His social media accounts were still there. Inactive, but present. I clicked through photos I'd seen before, scrutinizing details I'd never paid attention to. I checked comments, tagged locations, dates. Everything looked ordinary. Too ordinary. I left the hotel and walked aimlessly, following streets he'd described to me over the years. There's a park near my place, he'd once said. I walk there when I need to think. I found the park. I stood at the entrance, unsure what I was hoping to feel. It was quiet, empty, just a few joggers and a man walking a dog. I sent another message. I'm worried. Unread. By the third day, his social media was gone. Not blocked, gone. Profile photos replaced with generic icons. Links returned error pages. Accounts that had existed for years vanished overnight, like they'd never been there at all. I refreshed repeatedly, my thumb moving faster than my thoughts. The absence felt louder than any explanation could have been. That's when I started taking screenshots. I didn't know what I was collecting. I just knew it felt wrong to let things disappear without leaving a trace. I documented call logs, message timestamps, profile changes. I saved usernames, email addresses, old photos. I printed everything in the hotel's business center, the printer whirring softly in the empty room. I slid the pages into a manila folder along with my boarding pass, like evidence. I searched his name. Pieces existed, but they didn't connect. Addresses that didn't line up. Phone numbers tied to unrelated people. Mentions that felt almost right but not quite. It was like trying to assemble a puzzle with pieces from different boxes. I walked neighborhoods he'd described to me, following directions he'd given casually over the years. Turn left at the park. There's a bookstore I like near the corner. I found the bookstore. I stood outside, staring at the sign, acutely aware of how strange it was to navigate someone else's memories without them present. Each night, I returned to the hotel with sore feet and no answers. I sat on the bed and stared at my phone, willing it to change. I drafted messages and deleted them. Angry ones, gentle ones, pleading ones. None of them felt right. I didn't want to accuse him. I wanted him to explain himself. By the fourth day, something shifted. I stopped checking my phone constantly. The habit broke on its own, like my body had reached a limit. I went longer stretches without looking at it, and when I did, I felt less surprised by the silence. The disappointment dulled into something heavier, more permanent. I emailed my supervisor and said I needed to come back early. I didn't explain why. I couldn't find words that didn't sound unbelievable, even to myself. At the airport, waiting for my return flight, I sat in a different terminal, watching different doors open and close. This time, I wasn't waiting for anyone. I boarded when my group was called. I took my seat. I stared out the window as the plane lifted off, the city shrinking beneath the clouds. I didn't hear from him. Weeks passed, then months. At first, I told myself he might resurface, that there would be an explanation that made sense of everything. I kept the folder on my desk, within reach. I checked my email obsessively, half expecting a long message to appear, full of apologies and reasons. It never came. Eventually, the idea of closure began to feel abstract, like something that happened to other people. I went back to work. I did laundry. I grocery shopped. I laughed at the right moments. But there was a quiet undercurrent to everything, a sense of unfinished business that never quite left. That's when I filled out the application for Catfish. I didn't expect much. I did it because it was something concrete, something that promised answers. A producer contacted me a few weeks later. We spoke on the phone. She asked me to walk her through everything, how we met, how long we'd talked, what happened at the airport. I sent her everything, screenshots, timelines, usernames, email addresses. They found information. Enough to confirm that someone matching his details existed. Enough to know it wasn't nothing. They reached out to him. He responded once. Just once. He refused to meet. He refused to be filmed. Without him, the episode couldn't move forward. The show never aired. That was the closest I ever came to an answer. I remember sitting on my couch after that call, phone pressed to my ear long after the line went dead. I stared at the wall, trying to absorb what I'd been told. There was no reveal, no confrontation, no explanation neatly packaged for me to process. Just confirmation that he could have answered, and chose not to. I never heard from him again. No explanation email, no apology, no reappearance under another name, just absence. Over time, the sharpness of it faded, replaced by something quieter but more persistent. A question that didn't have an answer and probably never would. After the call with the Catfish producer, I didn't cry right away. That surprised me. I had imagined that confirmation, any confirmation, would unlock something dramatic. Relief, anger, grief. Instead, I felt flat, like the air had been let out of a room without making a sound. I sat on the couch for a long time, phone still in my hand, staring at a spot on the wall where the paint texture changed slightly. I remember noticing that detail because it felt important to notice something. The producer had been kind. She had said she was sorry. She had said, sometimes the answer is that they don't want to be found. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. When the line disconnected, the silence in my apartment felt different than it had before. Not heavy, not tense, just empty. I slid the folder out from under the coffee table and opened it again. Printed screenshots, call logs, dates circled in pen. At some point during the trip, I'd started annotating things, writing notes in the margins like I was studying for an exam. Message delivered, not read. Profile deleted overnight. Phone rang, voicemail. Seeing it all laid out like that made it feel procedural, almost clinical, as if this had happened to someone else. I closed the folder and pushed it back under the table. For a long time after that, nothing changed on the outside. I went to work. I answered emails. I cooked meals I didn't really want and ate them anyway. I folded laundry and put it away immediately instead of letting it sit, as if order could prevent something else from disappearing. But internally, I was replaying everything. I replayed the beginning most often. That first message after the game. The way it hadn't felt loaded. I replayed the slow build, the familiarity that crept in without announcing itself. I replayed the moments I'd brushed off doubts because they didn't feel urgent enough to address. The times I'd defended the lack of FaceTime as just his personality. The way I'd explained delays to myself because the explanations sounded reasonable. I wondered how much of him had been real. Not just whether his name was real, or his job, or his address, but whether the version of him I talked to every day had existed at all. Or whether I'd been talking to a shape that adapted itself to me, learned me, mirrored me. That thought sat with me for a long time. People asked about the trip when I got back. How was California? Did you have fun? Did you finally meet him? I learned quickly how to answer without explaining. It didn't work out. It was fine. I came back early. Most people didn't press. The ones who did didn't know what to do with the truth once they heard it. Their reactions ranged from outrage on my behalf to awkward attempts at humor. None of it helped. At night, I sometimes caught myself reaching for my phone to send him something mundane, a comment about my day, a photo of something ordinary, before remembering there was nowhere to send it. That reflex faded slowly, like a muscle losing strength through disuse. Weeks turned into months. The folder stayed under the coffee table, untouched. Occasionally, I'd pull it out just to confirm it was still there, like checking a scar. I didn't want to forget, but I didn't want to live inside it either. I thought about making my own meaning out of it, about deciding what the story was if no one else was going to tell me. That felt impossible at first. I'd spent so long waiting for an explanation that choosing not to get one felt like giving up. It took time to understand that it wasn't. Eventually, I stopped expecting a message, not consciously. There was no ceremony around it. One day, I realized I'd gone an entire afternoon without thinking about whether my phone would vibrate. The realization startled me more than the silence ever had. It felt like crossing an invisible line. I never heard from him again. No explanation email. No apology. No attempt to reconnect under a different name. Just absence, complete and final. At some point, I archived the chat thread. I didn't delete it right away. I wasn't ready to watch it disappear. But I moved it out of sight, into a digital place where it wouldn't surprise me anymore. Life kept going. I met people. Not romantically at first, just socially. I noticed how different in-person connections felt. Messier. Less controlled. People contradicted themselves. They were late. They showed up looking tired. There was no perfect pacing, no carefully timed responses. It was uncomfortable and grounding at the same time. I realized how much of my connection with him had existed in the margins of my life, how easily it fit around everything else because it never demanded space. It had felt intimate because it was consistent, not because it was anchored. That realization didn't make me angry. It made me thoughtful. I don't online date anymore. Not because I'm afraid. Not because I think it's inherently deceptive, but because I understand now how much connection can exist without friction, and how quietly it can disappear without one. I understand how easy it is to fill in gaps when there's no physical reality to contradict the story you're telling yourself. Closure, I learned, isn't always something you're given. Sometimes it's something you decide to stop asking for. The last thing I did, months later, was delete the chat thread. I remember hesitating before pressing the button, noticing how calm my hands felt. When it was gone, my phone felt lighter. Not empty, just lighter. Sometimes peace isn't an answer. Sometimes it's just the sound of your own footsteps again, steady, unaccompanied, moving forward.